Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with an ambivalent Charles Coulombe.
Ambivalent. You know what? I am feeling ambivalent today for a number of reasons.
Okay.
One of them that was really hit me, I mean, like a ton of bricks. And I'm feeling this, ladies and gentlemen. I'm feeling the sadness. I will never be able, no matter what I do, I'll never be able to sponsor my daughter's Quinceañera just because she doesn't exist. I called a priest, about this very issue, and I asked, does your church do Quinceañeras? And he says, yes. And so the priest asks me, well, what's the girl's name? And I said, well, I don't have a daughter. Actually, she doesn't have a name. He says, what? What does your wife say? I said, oh, I'm not married. And he says, so let me get this straight. You want to put on a quinceañera for a girl who doesn't exist? I said, yeah, my daughter. My wife would be very upset if we didn't do the right thing. She's Hispanic. And he said, but you don't have a wife. You just said. I said, yeah, I know. She's imaginary, like our daughter. What is your problem, Father? Well, you know what? He hung up on me.
If this strikes everyone as completely random, we just barely finished the pre-show, and Charles just decided to take this on to the full episode. He basically broke me in the pre-show, at the end of the pre-show, with this madness.
But you felt better. It's true. So if you want to be a patron and find out what happened with the imaginary quinceañera, you go ahead and send in your buck, and you'll find out more than you ever wanted to know about imaginary quinceañeras and their imaginary activity. But I am feeling rather ambivalent for another reason. And that is that all across this great nation of ours, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the north to the south, the people have broken the pandemic lockdown. They've risen up in Minneapolis, in Atlanta, in Los Angeles, in Oakland, in New York City, in Houston, and they have said no to the man. They've broken out of the pandemic lockdown.
In Atlanta, too.
Yes, in Atlanta. They attacked CNN because of its sponsorship of the lockdown, probably.
I texted Charles that of the incident, and I couldn't help but be reminded of Star Spangled Crown that you wrote 4 years ago, where in this fictional account, you've got the mayor cheering on the rioters / protesters, who then subsequently burn her mansion down. Was it mayor or governor?
It was the mayor.
Mayor.
The mayor of Baltimore.
Yeah, mayor. And so this is the same thing. Satire has become reality.
I always say that's why I had to get out of comedy, because my funniest lines kept turning into headlines.
Well, that reminded me of the Babylon Bee. One of their things is their new headline is, to save time, we're just going to print Joe Biden's remarks verbatim.
Yeah, no point to just no point anymore. Well, we've gone past satire into parody. We're ridiculous. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen. We've become ridiculous. The one of the things that drives me a little bit cray-cray about this is that, as I have tweeted, millions of black infants are murdered every year, and nobody cares. One black guy is killed in a way that many white men are killed, police brutality, and the country erupts. Well,
Well, it is outrageous, and there is one difference. One's caught on film, the other million aren't.
Well, that's true. But you know what else is funny about this incident? It turns out that I didn't know this, but Derek Chauvin and his victim knew each other, and they worked together at the same bar as rent-a-cops, the security guards. I just learned that from my brother before I went on with the pre-show. So one wonders if there wasn't something else going on there. Now, the other bit of weird news on the whole thing is that he didn't die of asphyxiation. In other words, the knee on the throat. And by the way, I am definitely not condoning knees on throats. Chauvin sounds like a real piece of work.
Hearing about it, it's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, the question, and a lot of people pointed this out, the victim is going to be completely forgotten in the results of the wreckage. If you have your business wiped out by rioters, or if you yourself were damaged personally, you're not going to care what they're rioting about. And also, I'll tell you, back in '92, I was writing for a black magazine in Louisiana, Creole of Lafayette. And my editrix was, oh gosh, one of the best people I've ever worked for. Because she let me do what I want, which you don't get too often in editors, I can tell you. But she was great, all kidding aside. Still is. Though sadly, she's not in the business anymore. Great loss, frankly. But anyway, I wrote at her request an account of the riots, which I had seen up close and personal. And I asked my readers this question: how oppressed do I have to be before you think it's okay for me to burn your house or your business? I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, the answer will always be never. It doesn't matter how badly I'm treated. You will never feel that justifies you having your house and or business destroyed. Ain't happening. One of the more disturbing things I saw come out of this, and if these riots do not stop soon, I fear you're going to see more of it, was in Detroit, where a fellow pulled up in an SUV and started shooting at the rioters. Well, that's not a good thing. But shooting does produce looting, as the president so memorably said in his tweet, which was lifted by Twitter. That's got to be a first. But if there is looting, there will be shooting. There's no way around it. And in the midst of this, we've got this pandemic going on. You know, what's going to be really bizarre is that there's a big spike in infections in the areas where the riots took place. That would have the uncanny effect of justifying the lockdown. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, if you do see a huge rise in the virus amongst those who are rioting, yep, then you'll have to say that the lockdown was completely justified. If not, that's a whole other issue. But it's all crazy, you know? It's all insane. Any way you cut the apple, the Antifa people, the Black Lives Matter, and the mayor of Minneapolis, golly, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. Governor Cuomo endorses the rioting, but not the burning and looting. Governor Cuomo of New York. Well, I don't know how many riots he's been in, but it's very difficult to draw those kinds of fine distinctions once it gets underway. And the thing that really haunts my mind, again, from the '92 riots, you know, when it was all over, And I think we've discussed this not long ago on the show, but when the riots were over and all the stores, the supermarkets were burned out, the churches and so forth sent school buses to take the housewives from the affected areas to supermarkets at some distance so they could shop. Well, the LA Times lady asked this one housewife, before she got on the bus, she said, did you take part in the looting in the last several days? She says, oh, yeah, I did. Everybody on my block did. Oh, yeah. Well, did it ever occur to you that if you did that, there'd be no place to shop later on? And she said, oh, well, we never thought about later. Well, see, that's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. That's the problem with mobs. I actually had a discussion several days ago, before any of this started, with a fellow who who asked me online, social media. He asked me if I thought that mobs were always bad, implying, of course, that there could be a mob assembled for a good reason. And my response was pretty much, yeah, because the problem with a mob is that it's mindless. It brings out the worst in us because we feel brave. Individuals will very often never do things they'll do if they're part of a mob.
I think it's a question of responsibility.
Wow.
See? Well, I'm just going with the flow. I'm just part of this, and that kind of includes democracy too, to be honest. When people vote on an issue, it's like you're not personally responsible, right? Like,
No.
You vote pro-choice. Well, it's not just me, it's everybody.
Or you vote for someone who votes pro-choice.
Yeah.
And the meme, democracy, the system that brings you Barabbas instead of Jesus.
I've seen that. I've seen you post that, yeah.
A lot of truth to it. But anyway, that's kind of bizarre and annoying, ladies and gentlemen. And I am ambivalent, supremely ambivalent.
Gosh, that's so basic, isn't it? It's like there's chaos and then there's order. Evil and good. Was there a book, Christ or Chaos? I feel like there's a book, Christ or Chaos.
Yes, there was a book. No, there's a website by a fellow who outed me as a Satanist, Dr. Drolesky.
Oh, that's how I came across it. Yeah,
Yeah, Christ or Chaos.
There you go.
He, interesting man. Yeah. Interesting man, Dr. Drolesky. He, I feel very badly for him, actually, because when he became a sedevacantist, everybody he knew dropped him. Like a red-hot potato, which I never actually met the man, which made his assaults on me kind of interesting. But still, I felt very badly for him that, suddenly these people who'd hailed him as the wise man dumped him. I've had several friends turn sedevacantist, and I'll tell you, I don't agree with them, and I can't say I approved, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know them.
Okay. All right, let's move on to some the memes of production.
Yes, nationalize the memes of production.
For the common good.
That's right.
Okay, first one is from a patron, Alexander. He made this. Things not in... so you have, I guess, Jesus with keys going to the key copy machine. So there's things not in the Bible. I'll need a set of keys for Luther and a set of keys for Calvin and Joseph Smith. And also, that's clever. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And cruel.
What do we got next? We've got, this one. I forgot where I got this one from. I love this one. So at the top, you've got Plato or Aristotle?
It's Aristotle.
Aristotle. Time is real. You've got Kant. It says, time is an illusion of the mind. Then you've got Marx, and time was invented by clock companies to sell more clocks.
Nationalize the memes of production.
Oh,
it's very true. We all know this.
Okay.
It's very, very true.
And now we have a special one which I've plucked from Twitter because I just felt it was so darn interesting. Here, let me share my screen with Charles so that he can see this. You can see my screen, right, Charles?
I can. I can even see me.
Okay,
Ooh,
here
there
we
it
go.
is.
So
This,
yeah, do you want to walk us through this, Charles?
this requires real unpacking.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, this requires unpacking and scattering around the floor. All right, well, this shows us what it purports to be the power structure under which we hapless helots live. At the top is Satan.
Okay, yeah.
This is who's really in control. Now, Satan, in turn, rules the monarch of England. And there we see Queen Elizabeth looking very grandmotherly. Now, she, in turn, controls the Church of England. Now, the Church of England controls both the Archdiocese of Canterbury, this part we knew, but it also controls the Vatican and Jesuitism, by which I suppose they mean the Society of Jesus. Canterbury, on the other hand, controls both Islam and Zionism together, you see. And see, this shows you the conflict between Rome and Canterbury, the conflict between Zionism and Islam. These sorts of apparent conflicts are meant to keep your mind off the real story going on elsewhere. All right. So Zionism and the Jesuits together control banks, media, and governments. Whereas from Islam, Wahhabism, which is the sect that is supreme in Saudi Arabia, and as you see is controlled by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and thus by the Church of England, and so by the Queen, and thus by Satan. Wahhabism, in turn, with Islamic terrorism, controls both the CIA and Washington. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
Okay, but both Zionism, the Vatican, and the Jesuits, as I say, control banks, media, and governments. Now, the CIA and Washington, in turn, control the Freemasons. Now, the Freemasons are the foot soldiers. They only look like they're in control. In fact, they answer to the same banks, media, and governments that are controlled by the Vatican and the Jesuits and by the Zionists. Now, the Freemasons, however, also have control to some degree over the CIA and Washington, who have control over them, and also of Islamic terrorism, who in turn have control over the CIA and Washington, who in turn control the Freemasons, who in turn control the CIA and Washington and Islamic terrorism. So, basically, the entire power structure of the planet is united. They are all united, the whole thing, every government on earth, every church, every religious body, they're all united and they're all under Satan. Now, what does that mean? It means several things. Firstly, it means that all apparent conflicts, as I say, are only apparent and are meant to keep your attention away from the real story. And that's not all. Notice something very, very interesting. We've got the entire power structure of the planet here. Notice there aren't any good guys. It's all evil.
The Vatican's a good guy. They just got it wrong.
No, they're all under Satan. Now, given that everything's under Satan and evil, where does this leave us? What about the poor helots, ourselves, slaves of Satan, with nowhere to turn?
I don't know. We're just wandering the desert. Just kind of.
Except that the desert, he's got both Moses and Pharaoh. It's kind of hard being a child of Israel when both the prophet and the pursuer are satanic.
Well, this isn't the power structure of the entire world.
Yeah, it's everybody. It's all involved. Governments, media, Zionism, the Queen, the Pope, everybody. And they're all slaves of Satan, just like ourselves. This is one bleak worldview. It has only one thing to be said for it.
What?
It makes sense to somebody.
Doesn't make sense to me. I would think Freemasons would be high up in that chart. They're at the bottom. That's pretty surprising to me.
No, the top is the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Zionists, the Muslims, and of course the Queen. I don't know why conspiracy theorists love bagging on the Queen. I really don't know why, but they do. They love that.
Well, in what way? Like, do other than obviously, yeah.
Well, she's part lizard. She's she's one of the ruling cabal of the whole world in various views, various visions of what that cabal might be. But they always stick the Queen in there, except the Q people. You know QAnon?
What?
QAnon.
I don't know what you just said. Okay, QAnon.
They're pretty crazy, but they have just announced that the Queen was overthrown and replaced with the rightful king, John III.
John III?
Yeah.
Who's that?
I forget. His last name is Hallett, if I remember correctly. Anyway, the Queen was overthrown by Donald Trump, and the Pope has abdicated and is being held prisoner in the Vatican. Goodness has triumphed. I'm not kidding. I got this from a QAnon devotee, okay. Who, however, she informed me earlier, the Q is actually Princess Diana, who did not die. And you know who else it turns out is still alive? John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife. They didn't die in the plane crash. And JFK Jr. is pursuing his father's murderers. See, it's great when you can escape reality completely.
All right, first question is from Jonathan.
Okay.
I have read that broad mental reservation is morally legitimate to employ when the speaker has a good or just reason for doing so, or when the person to whom the speaker is talking does not have the right to the naked truth. My question is, who has the right to the naked truth, and how does someone lose this right?
People of goodwill have the right to the naked truth, and bad will, the intent to cause harm unjustly, loses them the right. I mean, where all this stuff was particularly used, for instance, as an example, was in England under Elizabeth. It was the Jesuits who became the masters of casuistry, so they could answer without incriminating themselves. Remember that under Elizabeth, it was a capital crime to be a Catholic priest. Now, this is wrong, okay? Yeah. Objectively speaking, it's wrong, except it was the law. So, if they know you're a priest, if you're convicted, you're going to be executed.
Yeah.
And you're certainly, A, that's unjust. It shouldn't be done. B, it also deprives the faithful of your services. So, how do you get around that? Well, they had several ways. One of them was the fact that they would teach each of the brothers sent on the English mission a trade. Yeah. Now, partly this was so he could support himself, because it's the church is persecuted. You've got to eat, and you're not going to be taking up collections. But it also allowed them to say, well, "Are you a priest? I'm a carpenter. Are you a priest? I'm a shoemaker." You see, they weren't lying.
Interesting.
They were telling the truth. But this person did not have the right to the naked truth because he wanted to destroy them. He hated the faith, and he wanted to execute any priest he could get his hands on. Injustice and bad will. He had no right to the naked truth. He had no right to anything.
Gosh. Okay. Next question is from Dane. Greetings. Firstly, I'd like to ask if there are any German Catholic men's fraternities here in the United States. I've been having some convictions about joining some sort of Catholic men's fraternity. And of course, the Knights of Columbus is the first to come to mind. But I'd like to play the field, as it were. See what else is out there. I've come across the Ancient Order of Hibernians. but have only a little Irish ancestry. I'm much more German, and being from Wisconsin, I have been searching for some sort of German Catholic society, but have come up short. Even if not German specifically, what other options are out there?
Well, in addition to the Knights of Columbus, I'm a Knight of Peter Claver, but most of us are black, and
most of you are black. Yeah.
Yeah. We are. But we do have a few white members, of course.
Yeah, a couple. Yeah.
But if what you're looking for is something German and Midwestern, I would recommend the Knights of St. John International. Now, these are no connection to the Knights of Malta or any derivative of the Knights of Malta. This is a fraternal organization like the Knights of Columbus used to be. With their uniforms are quite spiffy, really. They're designed after the uniforms of the U.S. Army in 1880, so they're plumed and all the rest of it. But I've only met a few of them, but they seem to be quite a good group, so I look into them. There's the Order of the Alhambra, which was originally intended to have sort of the same relationship to the Knights of Columbus that the Shriners had to the Freemasons. And they have fezzes and all that kind of stuff, but they're Catholic completely. Let me see. Now, of course, there's things like the Holy Name Society and so forth. Now, you might also look into, literally plug in German Catholic in quotation marks and Wisconsin, an organization, into Google and see what comes up. In fact, just for fun, let's see what happens. Let's see, German Catholic. Got me wondering, because I know there used to be a lot of German Catholic fraternal organizations, but unfortunately a lot of them ended up getting amalgamated and with other non-German Catholic and non-German organizations and becoming purely insurance deals, which is one of the problems that you see with a lot of fraternal organizations. They end up becoming just insurance. A lot of people are fearful that the Knights of Columbus are going to go that way. I certainly hope not. Well, I'll tell you, I threw in German Catholic in organization, and you know what? I don't see nothing but a bunch of German parishes. So try definitely try the, what do you call it? My mind is going. Definitely try the Knights of St. John International. And, you may give the Knights of Columbus a whirl, especially if the parish that the council is at is of German origin. You might find that more to your taste. See, one thing about the Knights of Columbus is that the councils can be extremely different. And even now, you might not want to go into the fourth degree, but even now you might find a pretty decent council. A lot of the changes that were in the works with the KFC have kind of gone on hold with everything else for the course of the pandemic. So we have yet to see how everything's going to play out in the real world. But we'll find out.
Okay. Dane's second question. Getting married next year and have been thinking a lot about how we're going to educate our children. Me and my fiance are both public school educated, and I'd like to avoid that if possible. How do you feel about classical education using the Trivium and Quadrivium methods?
Well, I'm all for it if the kid has a bent toward academic interests. One thing I've learned here in Trumau is that children should start learning Latin and Greek when they're in elementary school. If they're going to learn Latin and Greek, that's the time to start. Because that's when your mind is sufficiently fluid that you could really memorize endless streams of declensions and conjugations and all that. How do we know this? Because we do it in English. That's how. And the times tables and all the other rote stuff that children used to be taught. They were taught that then because you've got a fluid enough mind to do it. So if your kids seem very bright, yeah. But the caveat, and there is a caveat, is make sure that the religious program is either to your liking or you've got sufficient leeway or ability to supplement it. Because a number of these classical academies are Protestant or Anglican or Orthodox, and the educational part is fine, but you may find the religious thing somewhat problematic. So you want to look into that. If your wife and you are both up to it, there's also, of course, homeschooling. But some homeschoolers band together, so they're almost quasi-academies. You'll have one mother who's really good at math, teaching a group of kids, another mother who's good at geography or whatever. But definitely look into those academies. Just make sure that the religious piece is what you want.
Okay, a couple questions from Kentucky Traditionalist.
Ooh.
In the last episode, you said Enlightenment thinkers did not believe in natural law. Considering that our founding fathers were products of Enlightenment thinking, does this mean that they too rejected natural law? I was always under the impression that the founders did believe in natural law, as this is what conservative American political thought teaches. I've often heard conservative American thinkers contrast our founders' belief in natural law with modern positivist beliefs. To what extent did the founding fathers believe in natural law? Is the belief among many conservatives that the founders accepted natural law a flawed belief?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of them use the language of natural law. And you got to remember, too, when you talk about the Founding Fathers, you are not speaking of a monolithic block in terms of ideas or religion. They were very mixed. But deism was certainly present among them. Now, and certainly the most influential, people like Jefferson. So what was deism? Well, deism, of course, is the belief that there is a God of sorts. He's a creator, but he set the world in motion and basically has nothing more to do with it. They believed in a natural law of a sort, people of this kind. But it was not the natural law in quite the same sense the Catholics thought of it. Depending on the thinker in question, natural law might simply be what is most suitable for the human being, however you want to define that. But the Catholic idea of natural law, which is basically the law that God has put in each of our hearts and that can be discerned without revelation, that's a very different concept to the idea of natural law that people like Jefferson and all had in common. For one thing, the Catholic view of natural law is that it's basically a foundation upon which the divine law can be built. But for people like Jefferson, the natural law was it. End of story.
Okay.
And you'll see this, part of the problem with a lot of these discussions is that various writers and thinkers use the same words to address rather different concepts. So, for instance, the common good is a phrase that you get heard a lot. You, for instance, would like to nationalize the means of production for the sake of the common good. But what does that mean? Now, for the Enlightenment thinker, the common good was simply the aggregate of the self-interests of society, of all the different people making up society. The common good was whatever benefited the most of them. But for the Catholic, the common good was quite literally that which was best for the community. In other words, for the Enlightenment thinker, the individual interests were paramount. And that's why the majority became so important for them, because obviously there was so much contradiction, somebody's got to be in charge. And the easiest way to do it is to count the number of snouts, and, there you go. But for the Catholic, the common good is something independent from the mere desires of the population. Very often the common good is something that they won't like, that the majority of people might not like. So, for instance, the abolition of pornography. Now, for the Catholic, the common good would require the suppression of pornography. But in the Enlightenment setup, if most people want pornography, and we know they do, then you keep it.
That's
Now,
a good example.
Well, and it's an important one, because one of the arguments today between the so-called integralists and their opponents, who, I don't know, constitutionalists, libertarians, I've taken to calling them Murrayites after John Courtney Murray. But whoever they are, they would uphold the founding fathers' notion of the common good as against that of the church. They would say that the problem with the church's idea of the common good is that it leads to tyranny and fascism, because you're imposing a single view of the common good upon the majority. And you see, this is where the question it becomes so important. Who determines these things? On what basis?
Yeah.
And basically the Murrayite Catholic will say that the integralists are betraying the church's idea of religious liberty and so forth. And the integralists will reply that the Murrayite is betraying the church's entire tradition of social teaching.
Honestly, I think in our future, integralists are going to have to become champions of religious liberty out of pragmatism.
Well, I mean, that's what the church has always done in America.
Yeah.
But this is what brings us back to the original question. I forget if it was the pre-show or this show, but about evangelization and the problem of the country being ultimately religious. Because as long as it's divided into sects, there can be no agreement on the common good. There can be no agreement on the end of government. There can be no agreement on the end on natural law. You can't agree on those things because you're coming from radically different points of view. So religious liberty is what allowed the country to function. The problem is that in days gone by, although there were differing religious doctrines, there was a moral consensus. The vast majority of people, for whatever reason, and the reasoning behind it would be different. A Catholic would believe things were right and wrong for one reason, a Jew for another, a Protestant for another. They all had different reasons for believing it, but they arrived at the same conclusion.
Yeah.
But once that consensus was broken, well, that's when everything became a problem. And that's where we are now, because in the 50 years since the 60s, those varying visions of right and wrong have gotten ever further apart from each other. Until now, they're utterly irreconcilable. You know, at the end of the day, either we're murdering infants by the millions, or we're providing health care to women who need it. We're either allowing blasphemy and attacks on the integrity of the all-great God and his faith, or we're allowing artists to express themselves as they wish. Even if that means putting a crucifix into urine, well, that's the artist's right to self-expression. You see, these differing views become ever more separate. The only way, ultimately, that there could be true peace in this country is for one of them to prevail. Now, the downside is that if the other side prevails, it is not ultimately self-sustaining, because you cannot build anything on sheer negation.
Yeah.
You can't have a stable society built on families that aren't real. In the long run, it just isn't going to hold together.
Yeah.
So that's when you'll get something like Islam or some other animating principle that will say, no, this is, you see, the thing about Islam, like Catholicism, like Hinduism, like a lot of other faiths, is that it does deliver the bare essentials necessary for society to work. A strong family structure, a belief in a transcendence that inspires you to sacrifice yourself for it. You know, these are all the small things that every society needs to operate. Now, the reasons can be different. The ultimate end can be different. But you need these very small basic things to be somehow justified. And the problem with the American liberal construct, which is basically the Enlightenment taken to its ultimate end, to its reductio ad absurdum, is that you can't build on that. If society is nothing more than its individuals, each sovereign and able to do whatever they want to do, or even to reshape themselves if they choose, then society collapses. It cannot sustain itself. And this is why, I've said it before, I'll say it again, but I don't know that I've ever been this explicit, either in writing or vocally. But this is why attempting to evangelize their country, and that means their state, and that means their county, and that means their town, and that means their immediate circle, is not simply a religious duty for Catholics in America, or anywhere, or in any other heathen country. It is a patriotic duty. If you do not want to evangelize these United States, you are no patriot. You do not love your country. You may think you do. You may tell yourself you do. You can wave the flag and say, we're number one, and wear a MAGA hat, and you can do all that stuff. And that's nice, I guess. You can be out there on Memorial Day, you know, for the troops. You can tell every serviceman you meet, thank you for your service. You can send off the fireworks on the 4th of July. You do not love your country.
Okay. Kentucky Traditionalist's second question. In my last question, I asked about natural law as it relates to the Founding Fathers. How does natural law relate to the Founders' belief in natural rights? Will you explain the Enlightenment concept of natural rights? What does the Catholic Church teach about natural rights, and how do Enlightenment concepts of natural rights compare with what the Catholic Church teaches about the issue?
Well, basically, the Church teaches, and I'll deal with the Church's ideas first because they're older. The Church, they were the norm before the Enlightenment. The Church teaches that every human being has a certain dignity that comes to him by virtue of being a creation of God. So, with a soul that is redeemable. Now, that dignity is natural. It's purely natural. But it nevertheless pertains to him. if so, he has freedom from being murdered, freedom from having his stuff stolen. He has all sorts of privileges and rights and freedoms that come to him from that dignity. He, above all, he has a right to hear the salvific truth that will take him to heaven. The baptized individual, the supernatural man, he too has a dignity befitting his station, a member of a royal priesthood, etc., which is a higher dignity than that of the natural man. The natural man, of course, is fallen, and if he dies that way, well, that's the end of him. The supernatural man, if he perseveres, will spend eternity in heaven. It's a big difference. Nevertheless, in terms of governance, both types of man have very similar rights, etc. But error has no rights. So, the natural man or the supernatural man does not have the right, for instance, to preach, teach, or practice heresy. Now, this might be tolerated if to not tolerate it would bring about worse evils, if you see what I mean. To put this another way, I may have a right to your house. I may own it. But if I exercise that right and your aged grandmother is going to die as a result, then it's wrong for me to exercise that right. Because a greater evil will arise.
Yeah.
So, but all of these dignities that come to man, whether it be natural or supernatural, come to him purely because of his creation by God and because of the possibility of his eternal destiny. Thus, he has no innate right to do what's wrong, even if it's victimless. He has no right to prostitution. He has no right to slander.
Yeah, I know Pope John Paul, he said, freedom consists in the freedom to do what is good, not
Correct.
what is bad.
Correct.
And we've lost that.
Well, we've lost that because we have no one to determine, except the Supreme Court, of course. We have no one to determine what's good and what's bad.
Yeah.
And that takes us back to the Enlightenment. Because for most Enlightenment thinkers, what's good or what's wrong, what's bad, what's right and wrong is determined by the individual for himself. And so he basically has the right to do anything he wishes to, so long as it doesn't cause any public disorder. Or as they say, do what you want as long as it doesn't frighten the horses.
I've never heard that one before. Okay.
Well, you didn't hang around old people who would still be 100 years old if they were alive now. But the thing is then that you've got a very different set of views of rights. The Enlightenment basically made the individual primarily, and then secondarily what the local establishment would bear. In other words, they're not going to put up with you running naked through the street.
Yeah.
So you don't really have a right to that. Unless it becomes the norm, in which case you're fine. So basically you've got a right to whatever you can get away with, is what it comes down to. And you're completely self-actualized, self-motivated. As I say, Kant, although pursuing a moral code of sorts himself, he was very clear that you have to pursue morality for its own sake and yours, not for any outside pressure.
Okay. I mean, what does that mean? I'm not sure. Not from any outside pressure.
Yeah, in other words, your moral code should be entirely your own and not dictated to you.
That I've never encountered this before, but to me that's lockstep with well, I forgot what I was listening to, but it was like freedom from parents,
Yeah,
right? Like, oh,
ultimately.
you can't get your moral code from your parents because that's what's the word? That's totalitarian. That's people are pushing their views on you, and you should be free to
Yeah,
choose your own.
yeah. Now, of course, the problem with that is where you're supposed to come up with these views from.
Oh, from state schools. That's the
Well, there
only
you go.
place where freedom reigns.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long that lasts. Thank God they're locked down. So I didn't say it made sense. I didn't say it worked. And what's funny is how long it took for that kind of thinking to become dominant. That's the funny thing to me. It's not that it is dominant. It's that it took it so long. Because the great thing about it is that it appeals to all the worst sides of human character.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we all just want to let it all hang out. We don't want to have to be saying yes, sir, yes, ma'am. We want to do whatever we want.
All right. Next question is from Chris. Given all of the hullabaloo and internecine bloodbaths between Catholic social media personalities, do you think the SSPX is still a valid option to fulfill Sunday obligation and Holy Day obligation?
You might as well ask if I think the Archdiocese of Los Angeles is still a valid,
Yeah,
etc.,
I don't
etc.
understand. Oh, wait a minute. Can I go to church because there are bad priests in various places?
Nope.
What is it? The Diocese of D.C.?
Uh,
Right?
yeah. And see, right now this is a bit of a problem because I'll tell you a little something. I cannot really receive on the hand.
Yeah.
Now, in many archdioceses, absolutely wrongly, they are forbidding communion on the tongue. Now, to the degree that this represents old women of all genders in control, forcing it down our throats and using the pandemic for this purpose, all I can say is, well, no, I can't really say to hell with them, but unless they repent, that's where they'll go. Snap, crackle, pop, Your Excellencies. But what if I'm in a situation where the only place that I can receive on the tongue is the SSPX? Guess what? And if the bishop doesn't like it, there's an easy way not to do it, for me not to do it. And that's for the bishop not to use this horrible time to forward a really stupid agenda. There are a lot of people who don't understand or know the history of communion in the hand, and this will give them a little bit of a difficulty in understanding why it's such a problem for those of us who do. In a nutshell, read Memoriale Domini of Paul VI, which you can get online, which was the document that gave permission for communion in the hand. Communion in the hand, way back in 1968. Why is it important to read? Well, for several reasons. One, he goes on and on about why communion on the tongue is so much better. Then he points out that this custom had suddenly arisen, which the first time it ever happened was in 1965. This is 3 years later. In some places, it was on the way to becoming the norm, so he was establishing a way in which it could be done for those who wanted to, but he said the traditional way is much better. And he laid out a manner in which Episcopal conferences could adopt this thing if they wanted to. Now, I'll let you in on a little factoid. Back in 1977, when the American Bishops' Conference permitted it, they were supposed to keep it for a year and then have a final vote a year later.
Yeah, they never renewed.
And you know what that means?
It's illegal.
Yeah. But who knows that? Who's been told that? Who would be taught that in a regular parish?
Why would they teach that?
Well, that way the bishop would fire them. Oh, sorry, that came out wrong. So,
what was the name of that encyclical? I've got to read that. That's
it's
awesome.
Not encyclical. It's a document.
Or
Memoriale Domini.
Memoriale Domini.
Memoriale Domini. Now, in that context, if the only place I could receive communion on the tongue would be the SSPX, I would have absolutely no hesitation. None. And if the SSPX have shown that perhaps they're no better in some ways than an ordinary diocese, maybe it's up to ordinary dioceses to be better than the SSPX. You see, I don't know if you've been keeping score, but Mike Voros went on a great sizzling expose about various alleged malfeasances with the SSPX of a sexual nature. Unfortunately, in the one case, I only knew two of the priests that were mentioned. I only knew of two of them, and of the two, I only knew personally one. The charges against him seem a little bit unlikely to me. The one I don't know, I always thought was very odd. But one of them I did not know, actually did molest two young men of my acquaintance, which I know of a certainty. So it's not like the whole thing is simply cooked up to be annoying. But I repeat, the SSPX is a worldwide organization, and they're still going to have to run pretty fast to catch up with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles.
Sad but true.
Well, I mean, and again, I think that, certainly in the one case that I know of personally, the society's treatment of the issue was shameful. But if I'm given a choice between no communion on the tongue in my diocesan churches and communion on the tongue with the SSPX, guess what?
Okay. Next question is from Andrew. I was remembering recently that when I was a boy in the 1990s, one of my CCD teachers pronounced in class one day, perhaps a little too gleefully, quote, "Boys and girls, today we have some exciting news. It was recently announced by the Vatican that we no longer consider hell to be a real physical place, but rather a state of mind." End quote. I'm not sure which proclamation she was referring to, but I remember hearing this a lot when I was a kid, and it never sat right with me. What are Charles's thoughts on this? Are heaven and hell mere states of mind? Did our Lord enter heaven after the ascension by flying through space to the edge of the universe? Are heaven and hell perhaps physical places that lie in different dimensions? Also, are there any saints that give insight into possible answers to these questions? Firstly, let me add to his questions. What do you think he was referring to that the Vatican put out?
There's something tickling on the edge of my head, but I can't quite get it out and look at it. But I'm not surprised. I mean, firstly, as we were discussing this earlier, I'm sure Mother Angelica would have thought she's in for a big surprise.
Yeah, I was telling Charles, because I'm such a Mother Angelica fan, whenever this topic would come up of purgatory and hell, she would always give this hearty laugh, like, boy, are you going to be surprised. And I just loved it. It was just decadent. It was just great.
And so they shall. They are real places. Now, mind you, they're real places, but the funny thing about them is that if you're a demon in hell, even if you possess someone on earth, you're still in hell. And if you're a saint in heaven and you appear on earth, you're here, but you're still in heaven. Now, that you could see how a bowdlerization of that or a distortion of that would lead someone to say, oh, it's just a state of mind. Because in a sense, you carry it with you.
Well, what I'm just remembering right now is what you just reminded me of is when the demons possessed the pigs. Or no, excuse me, the demon was in demons were in a person, and Jesus was going to exorcise the person, and they begged to be in the pigs so that they wouldn't be in hell, right? And then the pigs like went off the cliff or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was still an agony. I mean, the agony of hell goes with them wherever they go.
Right, but also too, that to me suggests that hell is not merely a state of mind. They're referring to like we don't.
No.
You know,
it's a definite place. Now, the question of lying outside of space and time.
Yeah.
Another dimension. Yeah, I expect. I mean, obviously, there are not geographical places in this world, but they are places. They're definitely places. They're real and they are eternal. Purgatory is a place. It's not eternal, but it's real. And there too, ghosts who come back from purgatory asking for prayers and so forth, and who burn their impression onto pieces of paper or tables or whatever. They carry it with them, but it's not a state of mind.
Right. Another biblical line that comes to mind is, "Eye has not seen, ear has not heard what the Lord has prepared for you." So that, to me, if that was just simply a state of mind, I don't think so.
In my Father's house, there are many mansions.
Yeah, there you go.
So no, these are real places, but the modernist doesn't like to think of those things. The modernist likes things fuzzy. Doesn't like them clear and distinct. Hell, I believe you create your own hell here on Earth.
It's just so frustrating. I actually fell into one of these traps of getting in an online argument about church teaching on hell. And, no, actually it was the fewness of the saved, I think.
Yeah.
And, we were talking about the narrow gate, right? Go through the narrow gate, because someone directly asked, about, will only few be saved?
Yeah.
And Jesus directly answers it. And I'll never forget what the guy said. It was so stupid. He said, well, I see that more as an admonition to do good rather than a calculation.
Huh?
Like it's an admonition to do good. And my response to him was, okay. You could say the same thing about a study that links high cholesterol to heart disease.
Yeah, it's an admonition.
You could take it however you like, but what's being stated is a fact and a correlation that higher cholesterol has a correlation to heart disease. You can take it however you like. It can be whatever, but a fact is being presented to you.
I take it as an interesting observation.
It's just... But, you've got this weaseling around playing these word games. Oh, it's not,
Well, because they're uncomfortable. See, you've got two problems. You've got a saying that's uncomfortable, and you've got the inability to simply deny it outright.
I don't know. Sometimes I just simply can't help myself. What gets me is when I state something, because what got this person into it, what sucked me into it, is he's telling me, and he says, that's not what the church teaches. And so then that leads me to, okay, well, let me just dump all this stuff, just teaching on hell. Your turn. Oh wait, you have nothing. Oh, oh, okay. But and this doesn't change any. It's just
Well, it's because you got to
frustrating.
understand they're not. Such an individual is not arguing for truth. He's arguing to make himself feel good.
Well, right. This is
And
what I
there's
realized
no,
through your tutelage, that and also just dissecting people and motivations. And this is why I try not to fall into these traps, because I realize you're not actually arguing over the thing, you're arguing over something else. You're
yeah,
arguing over whether Professor so and so in theological college, who this person loved so much, whether he's right or wrong.
yeah, and that,
And he can't be wrong. We know Professor so and so can't be wrong because he was such a beloved man and a wonderful
yeah,
man.
he was so kind to me.
So that's why that knowledge of how people work now deters me from getting sucked into this stuff.
Well, and it's important because not only will you waste a lot of time, but you'll get very bitter.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
the truth of the matter is, I mean, look, if someone is bound and determined on something for emotional reasons, there is no logical argument that you can ever make that will do any good. I mean, it's one of the giveaways, of course, is when their objections are self-contradictory. So if I say, all right, so basically you have problems with Dorothy Day because she was a pacifist. And I said, well, no, she wasn't actually a pacifist. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, I see. So you're pro-war.
yeah. Pick
Well,
your
no, see,
poison.
no. What that tells you is that it's not about truth. It's about maintaining themselves in safety against the annoyance that you're presenting.
Yeah,
And, it's understandable because we all do it.
yeah,
The trick is to identify it and to accept it. I mean, if you come up to me and you start to talk to me about the uses of wine in fighting heart disease, and I say to you, yeah, well, my dad was a drunk. You know what? Clear off. Leave it alone. Because there's nothing you can say. His dad was a drunk.
yeah.
Just don't do that. I mean, and this is one of the problems, of course, one has with all sorts of people who've been through such terrible things. It's difficult when they have an opinion that has been partly formed by their traumatic experience. It is very difficult to really advance any kind of a logical dissent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, very difficult. If somebody lost half their family in the Holocaust and they hate the Germans, there's no point trying to point out to them that the Germans have a lot of fine qualities.
Yeah.
You just leave it alone.
Yep. Okay. And pray for them too. Whenever
Oh,
you're,
definitely.
because that flips a switch in your mind where it's like, instead of being frustrated that you couldn't get through in this way, it focuses your mind toward compassion and caring for that person.
And the annoyance you may feel for them is somewhat mitigated. I mean, one of the saddest phrases I've ever heard really ardent young Catholics say to me is, if I could just come up with the right way to express it, whatever it might be. And I have to say, pal, they've told me what they've said, there's no better way. They don't want to hear it.
I'm rereading Diary of Faustina, and the it just reminds me of one of the things that Jesus says, which is, in terms of an endeavor, he says, because she's worried that it's so hard and there's so much suffering, and he says that's how you merit, graces. Leave the results to me.
No.
And isn't that's a good way to avoid a lot of frustration. You just give it to God.
It is, especially bearing in mind, one thing that she says, he said, which I think is quite true. He said that he was very pained because people didn't trust him. What else we got?
Okay. Oh gosh, let's talk. Let's answer this last part.
Yeah.
Also, are there any saints that give insight into possible answers to these questions relating to hell? One of the saints that have really been on my reading list is Saint Alphonsus Liguori, and he has a staunch reputation for defending. I guess you could say it's a dogma of hell, right? I mean, that's a dogma of the church. I mean, Christ descended into hell, right? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of weird if Christ descended into a state of mind. That's actually...
Well, he did. He got a little depressed. After the crucifixion, he got kind of depressed.
So, but am I right that St. Alphonsus Liguori has a reputation?
St. Alphonsus is very good. St. Catherine of Siena.
Yeah, St. Catherine of Siena. Okay.
But gosh, actually, there are quite a few.
You did a talk on Robert Bellarmine. I remember you read his stuff on hell.
St. Robert Bellarmine, St. John Vianney. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. A lot of them wrote about hell and purgatory with good reason.
Faustina saw hell. She said there's countless people in hell.
Yeah, and it was seen at Fatima by the little seers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it put all that out of your mind. It's just drivel.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for today is from Theo. We saved the best question for last. My favorite question today for last.
Oh.
So here we go. Following Roe v. Wade and the enshrinement of abortion as a constitutional right, the editors of Triumph magazine wrote, "If she is to protect herself and she is able to abide by her divine mandate to teach all peoples, the Catholic Church in America must break the Articles of Peace. She must forthrightly acknowledge that a state of war exists between herself and the American political order." Lee Brent Bozell and others seem to have been very prescient. Please discuss how much more blood of innocence will be spilt before the Catholic Church in America realizes that the only options left are Christendom or martyrdom. Wow.
Well, Theo. As the professor said at Harvard, that was a question that ought not to have been asked. It's a very good question, and it's a very painful question. It was painful when Triumph asked it. It's even more painful now. Millions more will die. I promise. They may not all be infants, however, by a long shot. We are, I think, moving into a new chapter of the game. I don't know by any stretch where that chapter is going to take us. No place nice, I don't think. As we speak right now across the United States, in the midst of the great pandemic lockdown, people are rioting over the death, apparently, certainly in police custody, apparently at the hands of one of the policemen, of a fellow, and yet those same rioters have not noticed, and no one has been able to point out to them effectively, that a huge chunk, if not the majority, of the victims of abortion in this country are black and other minorities. And yet Planned Parenthood have a huge chunk of the black political establishment in their pockets.
I think I did the math. I think I actually did the math on it, since in terms of number of, I think I got the number of African Americans living in. Well, anyhow, long story short, I think the number is like 12 million African American abortions.
Well, see,
12 million, which would have been a 30% increase in their population had it all other things equal.
12 million black lives don't matter to the black establishment or to the white establishment or to anybody else. And ditto their white, yellow, and brown brethren. We have made a covenant with death. We have offered ourselves up to Moloch. Moloch did not, however, protect us from the virus. So I'm thinking maybe the sacrifices have been in vain. I don't know. The church in this country, as in the rest of the Western world, has made a comfortable peace for itself. And it's a peace that is secured to all of us who have grown up since that fateful year of 1973. An easy, quiet life. We weren't martyrs.
I think I want to change sort of the direction of this a little bit, because I think the big picture, looking at it in this forlorn way, kind of turns you into Denethor. And, it's like, oh, what can you do? And it's like the book
you could do. There's a lot to be done. But I'm afraid that the insistence on it being done will require a lot more discomfort. I mean, why is it nothing has been done? It's very simple. It's because the Articles of Peace have been very comfortable. I mean, stop and think about it for a second. Why is it, taking the bishops for starters, why is it that the bishops are not strident in their condemnation, not simply of abortion, but of politicians who favor it? There's a very simple reason. Tax. If the bishops were to beat the drum, say Senator Oblivion runs for the Senate again for the 7th time, good Catholic, always voted abortion like Father Drinan did when he was in Congress, always votes for abortion, but he always gets his picture with the Archbishop of his town, and he always trades on being a Catholic, always in the St. Patrick's Day parade. That's nice. If the Archbishop suddenly turns around and says, wait a minute, you're always voting pro-abortion, you're not getting communion, and I would counsel my flock to vote against you at the next election. Well, immediately, the IRS would strip the Archbishop of that Archdiocese of their tax-exempt status. Now, I don't want to sound like Denethor. I believe that this will change. And when will it change? It will change when and as things break down.
Well, I don't. The one good thing I feel that would be if we lose our tax exempt status is we have nothing to grovel for anymore. To me, that's that's like a move of Saruman going into Fangorn Forest and chopping the trees.
Yeah, pretty much.
You have awakened a sleeping Christendom that it's like, well, we have nothing to grovel for anymore. I guess you've released the bond, the chains that bind us down. I guess we get to be political now. Okay.
Well, that would, if they deprived the church of its tax exempt status, a couple of things would happen. We'd lose most of the property.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But,
okay.
well, stop and think about it. Most church institutions do not pay for themselves. They can't afford. They don't. They get by as is, but they're tax exempt. Imagine if your parish had to pay the same kind of taxes on the church building and on the property that any commercial organization had to pay.
Well, in addition to income tax or tax on profits, what other taxes are there?
Well, property tax.
Okay. Nonprofits don't pay property tax.
No. The church doesn't pay property tax. It pays property tax on businesses it may own. So, like, for instance, the St. Vincent de Paul store, they pay property tax on that.
Okay.
But not on the churches and schools.
Isn't
so they
that like $1,000 a year or something?
Depends on where you are. I mean, in one of the horrors, a few years ago was I found out that my old family home in New York, New York State, $18,000 a year property tax.
That's
well, there's a reason why young people leave.
I mean that's just more than health insurance. I mean, good health, like great health insurance. I mean, that's wow, 18,000.
18,000 a year, and what was funny about that? My nephew Philip and I had gone back to the old homestead, and it had gone to rack and ruin because about 4 years prior, apparently, the bank had seized it from whoever owned it then. And I was just sitting there. You could smell the mold. It was horrible. But I called my brother, took pictures in real time. My brother is a self-made millionaire, a real estate man and all that. And so I said, what'd you think about buying it from the bank? And he says, well, I could probably get it for a song from the bank, but the rehabbing would be expensive. Still, it would be great to have the old place back again. Let me do one thing. Let me check into the property taxes, and I'll get back to you. And I tell you, for a few golden minutes, I thought, gosh, maybe we'll get the old house back. Oh, man, was I happy. Then he calls me back and he says, no soap, $18,000 a year. I'm not paying that on anything. And I said, Andre, aren't you the one who told me that in real estate, sympathy and emotion always win out over cash? He said, I don't know who told you that, but it wasn't me. And in fact, it wasn't. But I mention this because the loss of the tax exempt status would have huge repercussions. But I agree with you in that they would have huge repercussions. And what do you think those repercussions would do with what was left of the Catholic community? It would get them motivated.
Yeah. Well, it's like, people are human.
Oddly enough.
Like you, in your advice for, getting a priest to do things, it's not always, the higher spiritual motivations that get the priest moving.
Not always, no. Sometimes a little of the old do-re-mi.
Yeah, and so too with, to me, so too with the reform of the church. You have the church, it's sort of survival of the fittest. This isn't right. I mean, the good churches stay alive and the bad churches die out.
And as things stand now, I mean, I kind of erupted on Twitter this morning, but it just hit me. when a priest or a religious or a seminarian has the risk of getting a reputation for being too orthodox, what that really means is that the institution they belong to, the diocese or the order or the seminary, is too heretical. I mean, could you imagine someone be at an office being called too efficient or too proficient? Oh, he does his job too well. Well, if they feel that way, what does that probably mean?
Okay.
So, at any rate, it will come to an end, Theo. Don't you fret.
I kind of
It will be broken.
I kind of wanted to leverage this into a hopeful thing about what each of us can do. One of the things that I kind of want to get across to people, I think there's sort of a failure in Catholic marketing a little bit in terms of how to inspire people, because I think people are intimidated by the idea of doing extraordinary things, like, whatever it be, like going to soup kitchens or, putting up a sign and picketing an abortion mill or whatever. I think that intimidates a lot of people. And so people are like, well, I can't do that, so I'm not going to do anything. And I think people are intimidated to make waves, to be confrontational, to at least me at the restaurant, make the sign of the cross. That used to be me.
I remember.
Yeah. And what I want to get across is that there are ways, very, very simple ways, to represent the faith. And I just wanted to relate a story. One of the things I've loved doing the past 2 years is going on walks. And in California, it's funny, nobody looks at each other compared to the rest of the country. Well, some people do, but it's a much lower percentage. But what I love doing is going on walks and passing along people, and I love wearing the Sacred Heart t-shirt. We sell it, teespring.com. Basically, I extracted this heart, the Sacred Heart image, put it on a shirt, on a t-shirt, to represent, and that is my way to evangelize, is people see that, and then they see the smile, and me being warm, and making the person feel good about themselves, and surprised that I did that. And I think in America, I think that's effective because we like nice people. We
do.
And so that I thought I wanted to give that because people, I think, are worried about, oh, how do I do this argument? How do I do that argument? And I'm saying, let God carry the bricks. Let God carry the load. By wearing, or like Charles always wears a pin. And people see that, and then all you have to do is be nice. You let God carry the load. You get, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and of course we were also discussing earlier about expanding your own circle of experiences, doing volunteer work and so forth, and different things that are, shall we say, quote unquote, apolitical, but nevertheless contribute to the well-being of your particular community. You can spread the faith that way. As far as the abortion mills themselves, too, I would remind you that you live next door to a success story in that area. We may not be able to get the government to shut down abortion all over the country, but you can keep Planned Parenthood out of your town. They did it in Monrovia. And you remember our friend Denise Riggio was the lady who spearheaded that effort.
Yeah.
And there is no abortion mill in Monrovia. Now, mind you could say, well, you just go to Arcadia, Sin City, as we call it in Monrovia.
There isn't one in Arcadia.
We're spoiling the narrative.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. You could argue, well, they could just go to Arcadia and get one. But they can't do it in Monrovia. And when the day comes they can't do it in Monrovia, maybe, well, can't do it in Arcadia. Can't do it in Duarte now. The one in Irwindale shut down. My gosh, you got to go all the way to Pasadena now.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the day will come when you can't do it in Pasadena either. Of course, you'll have to get members of the Junior League and the Shakespeare Society in Pasadena, but you know.
This reminds me, because again, we're talking about prayer and also, putting trust in God, not just social activism, but prayer. Steve from Sensus Fidelium, I think, just interviewed Eduardo, a famous actor, and I think Eduardo's got a special mission where he's trying to, I think it's for a pro-life thing, but 1 million rosaries said on a single day. 1 million. So if nothing else, pray the rosary to end abortion. I need to pray more. That is one of the biggest obstacles in my spiritual life, is I don't pray enough. And I was talking to my mom about it, how I suck at this. And she said an interesting thing that it didn't occur to me. She said, well, you need to have it structured.
Yeah.
I thought, oh my gosh, that's so true.
And the rosary is the perfect structure.
Well, no, I mean, like, it needs to be attached to something. Like, there needs to be a routine, or with
like
the family, or before dinner, or something. There needs to be structure there, or before daily mass.
That's very true.
So I think people who perhaps are struggling, as I am, consider, finding that structure.
Well, I always, when I was living in LA, I would always say the rosary in the morning while I was driving.
There you go. My mom used to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I don't drive anywhere, but every night at 9 p.m., a bunch of us gather in the courtyard and say the rosary. But it's funny. There was actually, I forget if it was a pamphlet, a book, or maybe just a billboard. But whatever it was, it said, "Pray the rosary to end abortion."
Yeah.
I remember that. So, again, I hate to sound all doomy and gloomy, but there is the immortal words of Van Helsing in Dracula: "We must pass through dark waters before we reach the sweet." And it's very true. Which, speaking of which, is that our last question? Speaking of which, a couple of things that have to be brought to your attention. In real time, we are doing this on the Vigil of Pentecost, which in the Byzantine Rite is Souls Saturday. It's their All Souls. Saturday before Pentecost. They have several other of these through the year, but the one before Pentecost is the big one. Now, you'll be seeing this on what our English ancestors called Whit Monday, Pentecost Monday. But it is the season of Pentecost, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very gleeful because tomorrow I'm going to be able to go to both the Byzantine and Tridentine rites for Pentecost. And if you can do that, back when I was in LA, I would try to do this. The reason being that the Byzantine rite, where we go in for red for Pentecost, they go in for green. And they have all sorts of pine boughs in the churches and all that. And you think, well, that's odd. Why do they do that?
Yeah.
The answer is that we look at the red flames of fire for the Holy Ghost, and they look at his role in growing things. These are complementary. They're not opposed, you see. Today, when we're doing this, is also the feast of St. Joan of Arc.
Yes.
And it's the feast of St. Ferdinand, King of Spain. Important character, not just because he fought the Moors, not just because he was the first cousin of St. Louis, the King of France. No. He gave his name to God's own country.
Hmm.
You know what that is?
What?
The San Fernando Valley. You're not impressed.
No, I'm hearing Bing Crosby's song in my head now.
Yeah, as you should. And I'll tell you something. Before Vatican II, because of that, St. Ferdinand his feast was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles.
Good.
I mean, it was in the missals and all that in the Latin Mass.
See,
Now,
Joan of Arc is a bigger deal. I mean, she had a huge impact. I mean, she was the first one to challenge societal and gender norms.
Yo,
You see?
did you see my tie?
Yeah, I see your tie.
You see the fleur-de-lis?
Yeah.
See my lapel pin?
Is that Sacred Heart or is that the Mason thing? I can't tell if it's the...
No,
Oh,
it's the
okay.
Sacred Heart
Yeah.
with the fleur-de-lis superimposed.
Okay.
This
Good.
is I've been French today.
You're French every day. At
Well,
least
that's
you
true.
try to be.
I've been very assertive about it today because it's Joan of Arc's day. And Saint-Jean d'Arc, she was extraordinary. And yes, she challenged gender roles. You know what gender roles are?
Gender role? What?
Not as enjoyable as Pillsbury rolls.
I knew you were going to go there. I knew it.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Because you made it that kind of joke before on the internet.
Well, I can't help myself. You know that. Anyway, of course, that's on a par. The rolls, came. There were special rolls in a restaurant in Boston called the Parker House.
Mm-hmm.
Parker House rolls. And true story, the late lamented Brother Leonard Mary of Song and Story, someone wrote in his high school yearbook, "Yours till Parker House rolls."
Hmm.
Was that bad?
That's bad.
Yeah. High school humor from 1940, 1938. Sad.
Okay. That is it for this episode. If you like this whole episode, please hit the subscribe button and the like button if you aren't subscribed yet. And remember, if it's Monday,
it's off the menu.
And the soul you save
might just possibly be your own.
See you next time.
Good night.